In the earliest days of Bitcoin, the ecosystem felt like a small, fast moving workshop. Developers, hobbyists, and curious newcomers trying to make a new kind of money work in the real world. Out of that experimental atmosphere, Mt. Gox emerged, almost by accident. The name itself came from a different purpose, short for Magic the Gathering Online Exchange, a reminder that the platform was not originally built to guard what would become one of the most valuable digital assets on Earth. Over time, though, Mt. Gox pivoted into Bitcoin trading, and as public interest grew, it began to feel like the center of gravity for the entire market. A key turning point came when Jed McCaleb, who had been associated with the site early on, sold the business to Mark Karpeles. Under new leadership, the exchange expanded rapidly, and by early 2014, it was processing the majority of Bitcoin trading volume worldwide, numbers so large that many people treated Bitcoin's price and Mt. Gox's price as almost the same thing. That dominance had a quiet psychological effect. Users assumed that a platform so central must also be stable, professional, and safe, even if the broader industry was still young and inconsistent. Inside the company, the reality was more complicated. A fast growing exchange is not just a website, it is a round the clock financial system. It needs reliable banking connections, disciplined accounting, careful custody practices, and a security culture that assumes something will eventually go wrong. But in the early Bitcoin era, many exchanges were built like startups racing against time, prioritize growth, patch issues later, and hope reputation stays ahead of risk. For many users, the convenience of keeping coins on an exchange outweighed the discomfort of managing private keys themselves. Mt. Gox became the place where Bitcoin felt easy. And when a system becomes the default, people often stop asking the uncomfortable questions until the day those questions arrive on their own. Mt. Gox also grew into a social symbol. Forums and chat rooms discussed every delayed withdrawal, every rumor, every sudden price move. Users watched it the way people watch the weather, not because they loved it, but because they depended on it. For some, Mt. Gox was their first serious encounter with Bitcoin. For others, it was the infrastructure behind their savings. That dependence quietly concentrated risk. A single company operating from Tokyo had become a global bottleneck for a borderless currency. In hindsight, this is where the story begins to carry its main lesson. Technological innovation can move faster than operational maturity. A platform can look modern on the surface while being fragile underneath. Mt. Gox's rise was not just a business success, it was a moment when an entire market outsourced trust to a single doorway. As MT Gox became more important, Small operational problems started to matter more. In a typical online service, a temporary delay might be annoying. In a financial platform, delays can be existential because users interpret them as signals. Is something wrong behind the curtain? Some customers reported slow withdrawals, confusing support responses, and inconsistent communication. At times, the platform seemed to be struggling under the weight of its own growth. Meanwhile, the broader environment around MT Gox was shifting. Banks were cautious about working with early crypto companies, regulators were beginning to pay attention, and the exchange's relationship with traditional finance was not always smooth. In public, users saw pieces of the puzzle, an account frozen here, a payment delayed there, without ever seeing the full picture. In the absence of clear explanations, the community filled the gaps with rumors, hopeful interpretations, and worst case fears. Later investigations and analyses would suggest that MT Gox had deeper issues than ordinary startup chaos. One influential line of analysis argued that large losses were not a single sudden event, but rather something that may have been happening over time, beginning years before the public collapse, meaning the exchange could have been quietly weakened long before anyone realized it. This is a subtle kind of danger, gradual failure. A slow leak doesn't look like an emergency until the tank is nearly empty. If a system is losing assets but the outward interface still works, the illusion of normal operations can persist. Customers keep depositing, traders keep trading. The platform continues to act as if it's healthy, even if the foundation is quietly deteriorating. For everyday users, it was hard to separate truth from noise. Some people assumed delays were caused by high demand. Others suspected technical limitations. Others worried about wrongdoing. But most users didn't have the data to confirm anything. That is the challenge of centralized platforms. The user experience is simple by design, and that simplicity hides complexity. People can only judge by what they can see: prices, withdrawals, announcements, while the most important facts remain internal. In communities, trust often becomes social. If friends are using a service, it feels safer. If a platform has survived past turbulence, it feels resilient. MT Gox benefited from that social trust, and it also became trapped by it. The more important it became, the harder it was to admit weakness, because any admission could cause a run, users rushing to withdraw, making the problem instantly worse. Looking back, the warning signs weren't one dramatic red flag. They were a pattern: friction, opacity, and stress showing up in small ways. The story teaches that risk often arrives quietly. A single delay might be harmless. Repeated delays, unclear communication, and an absence of verifiable transparency are the kind of signals that deserve attention, especially when the platform has become your main gateway to a volatile asset. In February 2014, Mt. Gox's problems stopped being issues and became a crisis. The exchange suspended trading and withdrawals, its website went dark, and the company entered bankruptcy proceedings in Japan. The event landed like a shockwave across the Bitcoin world, not because problems had never happened before, but because Mt. Gox was not a small player. It was the main stage. Then came the number that defined the collapse. Hundreds of thousands of Bitcoins reported missing, often summarized as about 850,000 BTC, representing customer coins and company holdings. At the time, that was valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and it amounted to a meaningful fraction of all Bitcoins in existence. Mt. Gox said it believed there was a high likelihood the coins had been taken through unauthorized means, and it presented itself as overwhelmed by a situation it could not control. For customers, the experience was personal and immediate. Accounts that once showed balances now felt like locked doors. People refreshed pages, read forum posts, and searched for official statements, trying to understand whether they would ever see their funds again. Some had used Mt. Gox casually. Others had stored life-changing amounts there because it felt convenient. Many discovered, in the hardest way, what it means to be an unsecured customer in a platform failure. You are not holding the asset in your own possession. You are holding a claim. Soon after, Mt. Gox reported that around 200,000 Bitcoins had been found in an older wallet, an update that reduced the missing total but did not restore trust. The discovery raised new questions. How could such a large amount be found only after collapse? Was it mismanagement, disorganization, or something else? The public still had no clear window into the company's internal controls, and so every new announcement produced both relief and suspicion. The broader market reacted as well. When the dominant exchange fails, price discovery becomes unstable. Traders scramble, liquidity shifts, and fear spreads. But beyond price, Mt. Gox's collapse reshaped the culture. It turned "not your keys, not your coins" from a slogan into a lived lesson. It also pushed the industry to talk about audits, proof of reserves, custody separation, and governance, concepts that felt abstract until the moment a major failure made them urgent. What made Mt. Gox especially significant was not just the loss itself, but the way it revealed a structural vulnerability. The Bitcoin network could continue running normally while a huge centralized access point collapsed. The protocol didn't fail, the doorway failed. And because so many people used the same doorway, the impact felt like the whole system was falling, when in reality, it was the concentration of trust that broke. After the collapse, attention turned from panic to investigation. How could so much value disappear? Was it a single catastrophic event or a long running issue that nobody stopped? Analysts began to study blockchain movements, wallet patterns, and historical clues, trying to reconstruct a story from public traces and limited internal information. One widely cited view, supported by detailed technical analysis, concluded that much of the missing Bitcoin may have been drained over time from Mt. Gox's online holdings, starting years earlier. The implication was unsettling. The exchange might have been effectively insolvent long before the day it shut down, either knowingly or unknowingly, as losses accumulated quietly in the background. This matters because gradual loss changes the moral and operational questions. A sudden breach suggests a single moment of failure. A slow drain suggests prolonged weaknesses, inadequate monitoring, poor segregation of duties, weak reconciliation between internal ledgers and actual holdings, and possibly an environment where warning signs were missed or dismissed. In a mature financial institution, daily reconciliation and strict controls are the norm. In an early crypto exchange built during a fast growth era, those disciplines were not always present. The legal story also unfolded over years. In Japan, proceedings examined what happened inside the company and how leadership managed systems and records. A Tokyo court eventually gave Mark Karpeles a suspended sentence related to data manipulation, while he was found not guilty on more serious accusations such as embezzlement, according to reporting that cited Kyoto. The outcome highlighted a theme that often appears in complex failures. Incompetence, poor controls, and flawed processes can cause enormous damage even when intent is disputed. For many observers, the court result did not feel like a clean ending. Customers still faced long delays, questions about oversight remained, and even if wrongdoing is difficult to prove beyond doubt, the collapse still demonstrated how fragile user protections were in that era. The harm was not only financial, it was also emotional and reputational. People who once believed they were early participants in a future of finance now felt they had stepped into a system that was not ready to protect them. Over time, Mt. Gox became a reference point, a case study used to explain why custody is hard, why transparency matters, and why centralized platforms must be held to standards that match their influence. The deeper lesson is not simply exchanges can fail, it is that operational discipline is a form of security. When systems are opaque, reconciliation is weak, and accountability is unclear, losses don't need to arrive dramatically. They can arrive quietly, disguised as routine glitches, until the day there is no routine left to maintain. When Mt. Gox collapsed, customers entered a world that most everyday users never planned for. Bankruptcy procedure, creditor meetings, claim verification, legal deadlines, and slow moving negotiations. A bankruptcy is not built for speed, it is built for structure. Each claim must be examined, disputes must be handled, and the remaining assets must be managed under court supervision. A court-appointed trustee, Nobuaki Kobayashi, is often identified in public reporting as the key figure in later stages, became responsible for managing the process and safeguarding what remained. Over time, the legal strategy evolved. A crucial change came when proceedings shifted from a traditional bankruptcy path towards civil rehabilitation, a framework that could better reflect the reality that Bitcoin's price had dramatically increased since 2014. Under a simple bankruptcy approach, some users feared they might receive compensation based on old valuations, missing the upside of Bitcoin's growth. Civil rehabilitation offered a path where creditors could receive more value aligned with the assets actually held. But shifting frameworks did not make the process simple. Years passed. Creditors navigated complicated instructions and documentation requirements. Different categories of claims existed. Some people sold their claims to funds because waiting was exhausting. Others held on, hoping that persistence would eventually be rewarded. The case turned into a decade-long lesson in how slow justice can feel when technology moves at internet speed, but legal procedure moves at human speed. By late 2021, a rehabilitation plan was approved, marking a major milestone in the effort to return value to creditors. This was not the end. Implementation still required coordination, verification, and distribution, but it showed that the case had finally moved from endless limbo towards structured repayment. Throughout, a tension remained. The world outside was changing quickly. New exchanges rose, new custody standards emerged. The industry spoke more openly about proof of reserves and transparent accounting. Meanwhile, Mt. Gox creditors were still dealing with paperwork and waiting. The contrast made Mt. Gox feel like a time capsule of early crypto, an era when innovation was thrilling, but user protections were thin. The story also became a magnet for impersonation attempts targeting creditors, enough that official channels repeatedly warned users to be cautious and to rely only on trustee-approved websites and communications. This is an unfortunate side effect of long-running public cases. Uncertainty creates opportunities for people to exploit attention. By this stage, Mt. Gox was no longer just an exchange failure. It was an extended social event, thousands of people connected by a shared weight, learning, often painfully, how financial infrastructure, legal systems, and digital assets intersect when something breaks. In 2024, after years of anticipation, something finally changed in a visible way. Repayments began. Reports described creditors starting to receive distributions, bringing a near 10-year wait into a new phase, less about if and more about how and when. For many, it felt surreal. An event from the early days of Bitcoin was now being resolved in a market where Bitcoin had matured into a global asset class. Yet even this progress came with the familiar theme of the Mt. Gox story: time. Deadlines continued to move. Official notices on the Mt. Gox trustee site state that the deadline for key repayment categories was changed from October 31st, 2025 to October 31st, 2026, Japan time. That single update captures a decade of reality. Even when the direction is forward, the pace can still be slow. For the market, repayments carried another layer of attention. If many recipients chose to sell, would that create price pressure? The public conversation often treated creditors as one unified group, but the reality is more human. Individuals have different needs, different risk tolerance, and different memories of the ordeal. Some may want closure more than upside. Others may see repayment as a second chance. The same distribution event can mean relief to one person and renewed anxiety to another. The most enduring lessons of Mt. Gox are not about one company, they are about systems. First, centralized access points can become too important long before they are strong enough to deserve that importance. Second, transparency is not a luxury feature, it is a safety feature. When users cannot independently verify reserves or basic operational health, trust becomes a guess. Third, custody is a responsibility, not a branding statement. Holding other people's assets demands rigorous controls, constant reconciliation, and a culture that treats security and accounting as daily essentials, not occasional projects. Mt. Gox also teaches a quieter lesson about time horizons. In technology, failure can be instant. In legal recovery, resolution can take years. When those two clocks collide, users experience a kind of drawn out uncertainty that is uniquely exhausting. That is why prevention matters more than rescue. Once a large platform collapses, even good faith recovery becomes slow, complex, and emotionally draining. In the end, Mt. Gox is remembered not only as a collapse, but as a turning point that pushed the industry to grow up. It showed what happens when a revolutionary idea meets ordinary organizational weakness. and it left behind a simple educational truth that still applies. Convenience is powerful, but it is never free. When we hand responsibility to a centralized platform, we must ask what standards it lives by, because if the platform fails, the consequences are not just technical, they are personal and they can echo for years.